110 million people. That is how many customers walked out of a single breach with their card numbers or their home addresses in a criminal's hands, and the door the attackers used was an air conditioning contractor. Here is the part that should stop every person studying for this exam. There was a control that would have killed the whole attack cold, and target owned it the entire time. They just never turned it on between the right two networks, and there is a name for that control that the exam comes back to again and again.
This is Erica, and that control is segmentation, the first mitigation technique in Objective 2.5. Segmentation means you carve the network into separate zones so that a compromise in one place cannot freely reach another. Today we are not just naming these controls, we are running the real ones live in a terminal.
Hey everyone, Jasmine here. The frame I love for this whole objective is defense in depth. No single control is trusted to be perfect, so you stack layers and now the attacker has to beat all of them instead of just one.
Chris here, and let me make the target lesson concrete before we go abstract. Fazio Mechanical, the contractor, had remote access for billing, and that access sat on the same flat reach as the cash registers. One phish vendor password, and the attackers walked from heating invoices straight to point-of-sale malware.
And that is the warning the whole industry carried away. A flat network treats every host as a neighbor, so one stolen credential is a key to the entire building. Segmentation would have put a locked wall between the heating bills and the cardholder data, and the cleanup ran past $200 million.
Here is the picture we carry through the whole episode, because this is exactly how the exam wants you to reason about every control in this domain. Think of the enterprise as a building with layers. Outside sits the perimeter. Inside that, the network splits into zones. Inside a zone, each host is hardened. The accounts on it run with least privilege, and the data itself is encrypted, so it is worthless if everything else fails.
And that is why we say no single point of failure. Beat the perimeter and segmentation slows you. Beat segmentation and hardening fights you. Own the host and least privilege limits you. Grab the disk and encryption denies you. 4 walls, not one, and the attacker has to defeat all of them.
That last wall, encryption, is the one the exam lists as a mitigation in its own right, and it is worth a beat. It is the control that assumes everything else already failed. An attacker can beat the perimeter and cross the zones and own the host. They walk off with a copy of the disk and still get nothing usable. Encrypted data is just noise without the key, and that is your last honest line of defense.
One refinement the exam loves right here. Classic segmentation splits the network into a few big zones, but microsegmentation goes further and isolates individual workloads from each other. In a zero-trust design, even 2 servers in the same zone do not automatically trust one another.
Which is the entire target lesson in one phrase. The heating system and the cash registers had no business being able to reach each other, and a properly segmented network would have made that pivot flatly impossible.
And segmentation is not only about attackers, which is a point the exam quietly rewards. It also limits the ordinary mess. The noisy broadcast traffic and the compliance scope and the one misconfigured device that would otherwise touch everything, all of it gets boxed in. A payment zone that only holds card data is smaller to audit and far simpler to explain to a regulator when they come knocking.
So every defense we cover today is a layer in that stack. These are the controls that turn the attacks you have already watched happen into a contained incident instead of a front-page disaster, and each one shows up as its own scenario question in this domain. Kim, before the demos, there is one viewer question that should anchor the whole episode. Read it out.
Gladly, because it shows up under nearly every hardening video, and it is the right one. Here it is, word for word. If I can only do one of these first, which mitigation buys the most safety for the least effort? Hold that question, because we answer it by the end.
Least privilege is the cheapest powerful control in this entire objective, and it answers the question Kim just planted. The definition the exam wants is simple. A user, a service, a process gets the minimum access it needs to do its job and not one permission more.
And the reason it matters runs straight back to target. The attackers did not start as administrators. They started with one vendor account, and every extra permission that account carried was another room they could walk into. Least privilege shrinks that blast radius.
The exam pairs a sister concept with it called separation of duties. Least privilege limits how much one account can do, and separation of duties makes sure no single person can finish a sensitive action alone. The person who requests a payment cannot also be the person who approves it.
There is one more in that family worth a sentence: job rotation. You move people through roles, so fraud cannot quietly hide in one seat for years, and it doubles as a way to spot when something is off. All three of these work together. Least privilege, separation of duties, and job rotation each shrink what a single compromised account or human can quietly get away with.
And there is a modern cousin the exam pairs with all of this: just-in-time access. Instead of leaving an administrator logged in with standing power all day, you grant the elevated rights only for the exact window the task needs, then they expire on their own. It is least privilege applied to time, not just to permissions.
Access control is how you actually enforce least privilege on disk, and the exam pairs the two in the same objective. The mechanism is the access control list, plus the permissions attached to a file or a folder.
Let me stop describing it and prove it. We are on an isolated lab Linux box, and I have a file that holds something sensitive, a payroll export. Right now it is wide open. I am going to walk it down to least privilege and make the deny actually bite. First, look at what we start with. The long listing prints the permission string, and those letters after the file type are the access bits for the owner, the group, and everyone else on the system.
Read those 9 characters in 3 groups of 3. The owner can read and write. The group can read and write. And the last trio, everyone else on the box, can also read and write. For a payroll file, that last group is a breach waiting to happen.
So I tighten it. 640 maps to those 3 groups. 6 is read plus write for the owner. 4 is read only for the group. And 0 is nothing at all for everyone else.
Now watch the deny do its job. If I become an ordinary user who is not the owner and not in that group, the operating system stops me at the door. That single line is least privilege enforced in real time.
There it is, permission denied. The file did not move, the data did not change, the user simply has no right to it. That denied line is the entire idea of access control made visible.
Windows reaches the same place with a different tool. There you manage the access control list with the command icacls, and the exam loves one rule about it. An explicit deny entry always wins over an allow. If a user is allowed by their group but denied by name, the deny is what applies.
And least privilege is not only for people, it is for services too, which is the part beginners miss. A web server does not need to run as the all-powerful root account. If it does and an attacker exploits it, they inherit root and own the box. Run it as a tiny dedicated service account, and the same exploit gets them almost nothing.
Kim, that is the exact blast radius idea from scene 1, just pointed at a process instead of a network. The compromised thing can only do what its account is allowed to do, nothing more.
And the exam has a favorite trap right here, so lock it in. The most privileged account of all, root on Linux or the domain administrator on Windows, is the one you protect hardest and use least. You do not do your daily work as an administrator. You log in as a normal user and elevate only for the moment you truly need it, because an attacker who lands on an admin session inherits the entire kingdom.
And here is the real-world trap the exam tests under the name permission creep. People change roles, they keep the old access, and nobody ever takes it back. Over months, an ordinary account quietly collects the keys to everything.
Which is why least privilege is a habit, not a one-time setting. You review access on a schedule, you strip what is no longer needed, and you default a new account to almost nothing, then add up from there. So the takeaway for this layer is short. The deny is what protects the data, and on Windows, an explicit deny outranks everything. Stay with me, because the next control splits real security teams straight down the middle.
Quick honest ask while we are here. If this has been worth your time so far, hit like, then subscribe and ring the bell. I know everyone asks, but this one is free, and it is how a small channel like this actually grows. Now to the fight that splits real security teams, and the exam frames it as patching versus configuration enforcement. Both are mitigation techniques in 2.5. Both stop attacks and the moment a critical flaw drops. Two reasonable engineers give opposite orders. So here is the stake. A severe vulnerability is announced this morning in software running on hundreds of your production servers, and whichever way you jump, there is a real disaster on record proving you wrong. Erica thinks you patch tonight. Jasmine thinks you test in a staging ring first. I am staying in the middle to referee, so let us hear the strongest version of each. Erica, make your case.
You patch tonight, and I will own that without apology. The window between a flaw going public and the first mass exploitation is now measured in hours, not weeks. Equifax sat on a known critical patch for months, and that gap is exactly where the attackers lived. Every hour you spend testing, someone is already scanning the internet for your unpatched box.
And I have watched the opposite disaster. A vendor pushed one under-tested update to production worldwide, and it took down hospitals, airlines, and emergency dispatch for a day. The cure was worse than the disease. A patch you have not tested is a change you do not understand, and a change you do not understand is its own outage.
Hold on, before you answer that, Erica. Jasmine just named a real global outage caused by a rushed update. Does a patch tonight urgency survive that?
It survives, but it narrows. The real answer is not slow versus fast. It is a fast pipeline that is also safe. You keep a small staging ring that mirrors production, you push there first, and you measure for an hour, not a week. Speed and a test stop being enemies the moment you build the pipeline ahead of time.
That is the concession I will take, because it points straight at the control the exam actually rewards: configuration enforcement. If every server is built from one hardened baseline, your staging ring is a true twin of production, so the test is quick and the patch behaves the same everywhere.
Then push on that, Jasmine. If configuration enforcement is so good, why not just lean on it and patch slowly?
Because enforcement keeps the door shut, it does not fix a broken lock. Configuration enforcement stops drift and closes the misconfiguration an attacker walks through. But a code flaw inside the software itself is a hole only a patch can fill. You genuinely need both, and that is the honest answer.
Agreed, and notice neither of us is actually arguing to skip a step. We are arguing about the size of the test ring and the speed of the gate, not whether to test at all. And there is a middle move the exam names too: virtual patching. When you cannot deploy the real fix fast enough, you push a rule at the firewall or the intrusion prevention system that blocks the specific exploit, which buys you time to test the true patch properly.
That is a clean bridge between the two of you. Erica gets speed, Jasmine gets her test window, and the box is protected in the meantime. But Jasmine, Steelman, the hardest case, the one the exam loves.
The hardest case is a system you genuinely cannot patch at all: an old medical infusion pump or an industrial controller the vendor abandoned years ago. The software will never get another update, and half of them fall over if you so much as scan them. Patching is simply not on the table.
Then you reach for a compensating control, and that is the exam vocabulary. If you cannot fix the flaw, you wrap the box. You segment it onto an isolated network, you tighten the firewall around it, and you watch it closely. You mitigate the risk you cannot remove.
Then let me land the verdict, because the exam expects you to resolve this, not sit on the fence. The cited guidance is consistent. You patch known critical vulnerabilities urgently, but you deploy through configuration enforcement so every system is identical, and that sameness is what makes a small, fast test trustworthy. So for a critical, actively exploited flaw, patch fast through a small staging ring, and for everything else, ride your regular hardened baseline cycle: speed for the emergency, discipline for the routine.
And that is the one line to carry out of the whole debate. The fight was never test or do not test. It was how big the ring and how fast the gate.
So patching and configuration enforcement are settled. Next, we make hardening physical in a terminal and shrink a live server's attack surface one command at a time. Hardening is the one word that ties this whole objective together, and the definition is a picture. You shrink the attack surface until the machine does only what it must and offers nothing extra for an attacker to grab. Removing doors, not just locking them. A door that does not exist cannot be picked.
Let me make that removing doors idea visual before we run it, because it is the whole mindset. A default install ships with a wide surface, every open service, an account, and port away in. Each hardening move you make removes one of those, and the surface shrinks toward the smallest thing that still works.
And the exam hands you a checklist of hardening moves under 2.5. Disable unused ports and protocols. Install endpoint protection. Run a host-based firewall and a host-based intrusion prevention system. Then change default passwords and remove unneeded software. Chris, make that first one real for us.
Disabling unused services is where I always start, because an exposed service you are not even using is pure free risk. Watch me close one on the lab server first by finding what is actually listening.
That telnet on port 23 is exactly the kind of forgotten service that gets a box owned. It sends everything in plain text, passwords included, so anyone sniffing the wire reads your login. Its secure replacement is Secure Shell on port 22, and that has existed for decades. Telnet has no business running on a modern server. Chris, shut it down.
Stopping it is not enough, because a reboot would bring it right back. So I stop it and I disable it so it stays dead. Then I scan again and the open door is simply gone.
And the empty result is the win. The scan for port 23 comes back with nothing, because there is nothing there anymore. That is hardening you can actually see.
The next layer is the host-based firewall, which guards this one machine even after segmentation and the network firewall. It is the inner wall. Let me clear the screen and build a tight rule set that allows only what we need and denies the rest.
Wait, host firewall and host-based intrusion prevention system sound like the same box. Which is which?
Fair cut in, and the exam separates them cleanly. The host firewall filters traffic by port and address, so it decides what may connect. The host intrusion prevention system, the host-based intrusion prevention system, inspects the behavior of what is already running and blocks malicious actions. One guards the door, the other watches the room.
Door and room, that is the line to remember. Now read us the firewall rule you just built, Erica, because that logic is the single most tested idea in this whole topic.
The default is deny everything inbound, then you add back only the ports you truly need, here just Secure Shell. A default deny base with a short allow list is the gold standard, and notice it is the exact same instinct as least privilege from Scene 2, just pointed at the network instead of a file.
And the endpoint protection on that checklist is the modern upgrade to plain antivirus. Today it is usually called endpoint detection and response. Endpoint detection and response. It does more than match signatures. It watches process behavior, flags a program that suddenly starts encrypting files, and can kill it mid-attack. It is the host-based prevention idea productized.
Which leaves default passwords, and that one is not theoretical. Look at what a factory default really enslaves.
These are exactly it. Internet cameras and a small office switch and a home router, ordinary connected gear sitting in millions of buildings. The Mirai botnet built an army out of devices just like these. It did not crack anything, it just logged in with the factory username and password the owner never changed. A default credential is a published key.
So change the default before the device ever touches the network. That is one rep that takes 30 seconds and closes a door Mirai walked through 100,000 times.
That is the through line of hardening. Disable what you do not use, wall off the host, and kill every default password. Each move removes one thing an attacker could have used, and the next scene takes this exact instinct to every platform on the exam.
The same hardening instinct has to reach every kind of target on the exam, and that is the part people skip. Servers and workstations are the obvious ones. But 2.5 also expects you to harden mobile devices and cloud instances, plus the awkward ones, the Internet of Things gear and the industrial control systems that run factories and utilities.
And the beautiful part is the technique never really changes, only the surface does. On a workstation, you strip unused software and enforce a baseline. On a phone, you require encryption and a screen lock, and you manage it centrally. In the cloud, you lock the security groups and turn off public access. Same instinct, different door.
The cloud one deserves a beat, because it is where beginners get burned the fastest. The exam frames it as the shared responsibility model. The provider hardens the physical data center and the hypervisor, but everything above that line, your instances and your storage buckets and your access rules, is yours to harden. A public storage bucket left open is not the provider's fault. It is a missed hardening step, and it has leaked millions of records.
The ones that trip people up are ICS and the Internet of Things, the industrial controllers, and the smart devices. They often cannot be patched at all, and half of them ship with a default password baked in. So Jasmine, if you cannot harden them the normal way, what does the exam want?
You fall back to the compensating controls Erica named in the debate. You isolate the device on its own segment, you wrap it in a tight firewall, and you monitor it closely because you cannot fix the flaw, so you contain it. It is the target lesson again, applied to a device that can never be fully hardened on its own.
Now the strongest software control in the whole objective, application allow listing. A deny list tries to name every bad program, which is a race you lose the moment a new one appears. An allow list flips the logic. Only software you have explicitly approved is allowed to run, and everything else is blocked by default. Let me show what that policy actually looks like on the machine, because the last line is the whole point.
So no signature, no prior knowledge of that file, and it still gets blocked?
Exactly, and that is why it beats antivirus for this. The attacker drops a payload into a temp folder and tries to run it, and the allow list refuses because that hash was never approved. Even brand new malware no scanner has ever seen is stopped because the default answer is no.
There is one more baseline control. The exam folds in here. Secure boot. It checks the digital signature of the code that loads at startup. So a rootkit that tries to hook itself in before the operating system even wakes up fails the signature check and never runs. Hardening that begins at the very first instruction.
And every one of those devices comes back to the single easiest door to close, the default password.
Chris, put the honest question to everyone watching, because this one is personal.
Here it is, and drop your honest answer below. Of everything on your own devices right now, how many are still running a default password you never changed? Be honest, then go fix one tonight.
Every target on that list, from a server to a smart camera, is the same question wearing a different uniform. What is the least this thing needs to do its job, and can I turn off everything else? Answer that, and you have hardened it. One layer of the objective is left, and it is the one people forget until it leaks data years later.
Decommissioning is the control that bites organizations long after they stop paying attention. When a server, a laptop, or a drive reaches the end of its life, you have to retire it so the data cannot come back and the box cannot be quietly reused against you.
And there is one assumption here that almost everyone gets wrong, so it is worth pinning down first. Jasmine, put the question to the room because this is the one that costs people real exam points.
Yes, and here it is. When a drive is being retired, is deleting the files and reformatting actually enough to keep the old data from coming back? Chris, you hear this one constantly.
Constantly, and the answer is no, which is worth real exam points. Delete is not sanitizing. A normal delete just unlinks the pointer. The actual bytes sit on the platter until something overwrites them, and a quick reformat does not clear them either. That is why secondhand drives keep showing up full of someone else's records.
The cited standard is NIST, Special Publication 888, and it gives you 3 levels. Clear overwrites the data, purge uses a stronger method like a cryptographic erase, and destroy physically shreds or degosses the media so nothing survives.
And the exam wants one more thing from a proper decommission: the certificate of destruction. You do not just sanitize the drive, you document that you did it. The record names the serial number, the method used, and who signed off. If a regulator ever asks whether that patient data really left the building safely, the paperwork is the proof, and no proof is treated as no sanitization.
Isolation is the fast cousin of decommissioning, and the exam wants you to keep them straight. Decommissioning permanently retires an asset. Isolation is the reactive move you make right now. When a host is actively compromised, you do not wipe it, you quarantine it. You pull it off the network so the infection cannot spread to its neighbors. But you keep it powered and intact because the responders still need to pull the evidence off it. Kill the spread, preserve the proof. That is the whole point of isolation.
And tying every one of these controls together is monitoring, the last technique in the objective, and the one target failed hardest. Their tools actually fired an alert during the breach. A human saw it, and they waved it off. A control nobody watches is not a control, it is a decoration.
And the quiet hero of monitoring is tuning. An alert that fires on everything trains your analysts to ignore it, which is exactly how a real breach hides in plain sight. Target had the signal, they drowned it. Fewer, sharper alerts beat a flood of noise every time.
The exam gives this a shape too, and it is worth memorizing. You aggregate logs from every host into one central place, usually a security information and event management system, a security information and event management. Then you correlate across those logs, so a failed login on one box plus a strange outbound connection on another add up to a story no single log would tell. Monitoring is not one alarm, it is the whole nervous system, which raises the obvious question. With 11 different mitigation techniques in this one objective, how do you prove you actually applied them and did not miss one? You do not eyeball it. You measure against a published baseline, and a real one has a very specific shape.
That baseline is the CIS Benchmark, a consensus hardening standard from the Center for Internet Security. Every control on it has the same 4 parts, and one real line closes the loop on our whole episode.
And look at that first line, because it is the exact service I disabled live 2 scenes ago. Ensure the telnet server is not installed, written as an auditable, scored control. Hardening and the benchmark turn out to be 2 views of the same single act.
One named example to make it stick. Picture Reyes, a hospital IT lead, who retires 40 old workstations through a NEIST 888 purge. She then audits every replacement against the CIS Level 1 baseline. No leaked records, no default passwords, no surprise telnet. That is this entire objective done right on a Tuesday.
So if today gave you a single rule, make it this one. Every mitigation in 2.5 from segmentation to sanitization is the same instinct wearing a different name. Default to no and add back only what you can justify.
So here is the whole objective in one breath. Every mitigation technique in 2.5 is a layer of defense in depth, and each one is a way of saying no by default. Segment the network, grant least privilege, harden the host and retire the dead assets so nothing leaks.
And the payoff for you is concrete. Walk into the exam able to match each attack to the mitigation that stops it, and the scenario questions in this domain stop being tricky. A flat network with a vendor pivot wants segmentation. An account reaching data beyond its role wants least privilege. You already know the answer.
My favorite moment today was that the CIS benchmark line turned out to be the very telnet service Chris had already killed. The standard and the command are the same act seen from 2 sides.
And to answer that question from scene 1, if you can only do one thing first, segmentation buys the most safety for the least effort because it contains everything else that goes wrong. The catch is that the other controls are what make that containment hold. Next time we hit the largest domain on the exam, security operations, and the one thing that surprises people is how far a single hardening audit score climbs command by command. Wait until you see the before and after number.
If this made the mitigation controls finally click, hit like and subscribe so the channel keeps building the rest of this free Security Plus series. And remember, there are free practice quizzes waiting for you over at certs.professorerica.com to lock all of this in. And here is the one I want you to answer for the rest of us. If you could only deploy a single mitigation across your whole network tomorrow morning, would you pick segmentation, least privilege, or hardening, and why? Tell us in the comments. The footnotes are where the money hides. Read them.
Calling that a 9, Kim. I wanted to give it a 10, but my notes have 3 tiny critiques. This is Professor Erica. Thanks for watching and signing off.